Okay, here is the Dutch rose block that we're going to make today. It's not hard. It's a whole lot of half square triangles. It is not hard. We're making the half square triangles exactly the same way that we made them in April. So let's get started. You're going to see a whole lot of video. A lot of it's going to be time lapse. It's going to be great. We're going to have fun. This is going to happen. Let's get started. Okay, so let's get started making this. I have laid out your kit. You're going to have your pattern. Let me hold this up closer to the camera so you can see a great picture of what it's supposed to look like. Okay, here are what's going to be in your kit. You will provide 6 5x5 squares of your background fabric of choice. I am using the pastel almond. There will be 4 5x5 squares of purple haze, 4 5x5 squares of deepest purple, 2 5x5 squares of red peony, 4 5x5 squares of bright yellow, 4 5x5 squares of blue lagoon, and 4 5x5 squares of royal velvet, along with 4 3x3 squares of blue lagoon and 4 3x3 squares of royal velvet. Let's just put these small squares aside. You're not going to need these until you're actually assembling the block. So I'm just going to put them to the side. This is one 20-inch square. If you have your quilt diagram, this is the big square in the upper left-hand corner. It's all half square triangles. It's made exactly the same way last month's was. 5x5 squares put together, sew around it, cut on both diagonals. And again, the hardest part of this is going to be putting your puzzle pieces together. So let's get started on this. We do have to check which, they don't all go to the background, obviously. Some of them go together. So you have your chart here of what goes to what. So let's get started laying these out. We're going to take match the following 5-inch squares. You need 2 each of A, which is your background, and F is your blue lagoon. So 2 face-to-face of your background and blue lagoon. Now I am just going to pin them together so that I know that they're together. Alrighty, so there's one set, and here's the next set of them. They're not, I'll have to do some adjustment as I go later. And then we need 2 of background and bright yellow. I will tell you, you may want to measure your blocks. My helper was being very helpful in running the die cutter, and some of them got run through multiple times. I think I got and so some of them maybe I got double or triple cut, so they may be like 1/8 of an inch too small. And I'm taking this one apart because I did not have the right side of that. That's the one thing, the pastel almond, you got to look carefully to make sure you have the right side, not the wrong side. There we go. Okay, so you may need to do a scant 1/4 inch on some of these. All right, and then 1 each of background and deepest purple, background and purple haze. and then deepest purple and purple haze. Okay, so I had to grab a pen because I'm getting myself confused, as you might also. I'm going to have to check off on my pattern what I have matched up. So I have matched up A and F, which is background and blue lagoon. I got those two. Check those two off. Then I have matched up A and E, background and bright yellow, two of those. A and C is background and deepest purple. I have one of those. A and B, background and purple haze. I have one of those. Now, what's the next thing? Deepest purple and purple haze. Yes, I have that one. And then I need B is purple haze and bright yellow. I can get them to come apart. There we go. So that's that one. Then we need deepest purple and royal velvet. And the way Cheryl's written these the pattern, the fabrics have letters, shorthand there. All right, the next is E, which is bright yellow, and C, which is deepest purple. Then we have F, which is blue lagoon, and G is royal velvet. Then we have B, which is purple haze, and G, which is royal velvet. Then we have G, which is royal velvet, and D, which is red peony. And then the last two pair together, red peony and blue lagoon. All right, so again, like I said, these are going to be sewn exactly the same way you made your half squares for the April block. You're going to sew a 1/4 inch all the way around. You're going to cut on both sides. Lots of sewing, lots of cutting. Let's head over to the sewing machine. All right, so I'm just going to sew 1/4 inch all the way around on all of these sets of blocks. Here we go. Find my foot pedal down here. There it is. All right, let's get to this. Is our last block. Had a small mishap with the block that I cut these today on myself, and apparently one piece was a smidge small. I used scraps instead of cutting new stuff off the bolt, and so one scrap was a little too small for the die cutter. I fixed it. Here's the last block. Alright, so now all of our sets of 5-inch blocks are sewn together. Get this one cut off the machine. Where did I put my scissors? There they are. Alright, so now each one of these we're going to cut on each diagonal to make 4 half squares out of each. And so let's go over to the cutting board and start cutting. Okay, so here is our pile of blocks sewn together around the edge. Now we have to cut all of these. Move everything away except for one set. Here we go. Here's one set. And we're just going to cut straight across the diagonal, and hopefully my seams are even. Some of my seam allowances look a little small, but that's okay. We're going to deal with it. Now, when we open things out, after I get anything that the rotary cutter missed, the rotary cutter missed something there. It's a relatively new blade, but I use it a lot, so it could be going dull on me again already. Alright, so you saw that. We're going to open this out, and there is 4 half squares out of one pair of 5-inch blocks. You get 4 of them. Alright, so all we have to do is cut everything. All right, so now that we have our pile of half square triangles, we're going to need to press them. Here's our pile of half square triangles. Now we're going to need to press them open and press them towards whatever you consider dark, like on this one, which, you know, whatever. I may or may not keep them pressed towards the dark once I start pinning things together, but pressing them towards the dark is to start with. So here's my pile. Let me get my iron plugged in. And we will start pressing this pile of pieces. Okay, finally to the last one. As I was saying to my husband over there, who is being my video producer, I sure wish I had a team here. One to cut, one to sew, one to press. This is a lot of repetition on this block. All right, so now everything is pressed. Let me unplug the iron, move it out of the way. Here is the pile of half square triangles. Now the next step is one that Cheryl doesn't often put in her patterns, but she did in this one. She says trim these to 3 inches, primarily because you want to get all of those little corners off. So let's turn the mat over to the cutting side. Get rid of all these scraps that pulled off. And grab my little tiny ruler. And we're going to trim these to 3 inches. What are they? They look like they're ending up at about 3 1/8. So just barely going to be shaving. Make sure that I'm using a square one here and my 45-degree line goes right into the corner. Make sure your 45-degree line is on your seam so that it ends up square and everything will match up much better. So I'm going to cut that side and that side, and hopefully it trimmed everything. And it looks like oftentimes these little corners like to just hang on just barely. Come on. And then turn it around the other side. And now not only do you make sure that your 45-degree line is on your corner, make sure that these edges line up with your 3-inch mark so that these end up being 3-inch squares. And we have to do this with all of these. You can see where it should have cut. I think my mat, this is an older mat. I think it's more the mat than a function of my blade, actually. Okay, so back to the next very repetitious step. We have to trim all of this, just like we did on this one. Okay, one last piece to trim, finally. And no, you did not see me trimming every single piece. It was taking a monstrously long amount of time, but it has to be done. So the video is going to be a shorter than process time-wise than what you're actually going to have. And every single one of these, some of these I trimmed off only a little bit. Some of these I actually trimmed off quite a bit. Every one of them trimmed something off though, so this will help make sure everything comes together. In the proper amount of time, or in the proper size. Wiggles, wiggles, stay still. Okay, there is the last one trimmed. Here is the pile of trimmed half square triangles. Now is the time that we're going to put the jigsaw puzzle together. I did have some people tell me that, like when they did the April block, they had it all laid out, they picked up 2 pieces to go sew, and by the time they got to the sewing machine with them, something twisted and they sewed the wrong side together. So I'm going to show you a couple of tricks, maybe best practices that I can think of in order to keep everything going, sewing the correct sides. I'm going to raise the camera up a little bit to zoom out, because I'm going to change what board I have on here. Sorry, I wiggled something there.
Just pause. Oh, there you go.
There we go. Okay. Now I'm going to get out my largest ruler, which is a 16 by 16, which is not big enough to do a 20 by 20 on. So then I have my 16.5 by 16.5, and then put beside it my 18.5 by ruler. So I should be able to. Now, can we see the whole thing in the screen?
No.
Okay, let me raise up somewhat further. How's that?
Move it a little bit toward that way.
A little bit this way?
That's just almost all of it, so that's pretty good.
Okay. All right, so here's my 2 cents, what I think is probably the best way to keep everything straight. When you get everything, all your pieces laid out, you want to then, if you're laying them out at a place that's far from your machine, you want to bring the whole thing as close to your machine as possible. 2 things you want to do. Try to not move your feet between grabbing 2 pieces to put together and taking them to your machine. And the other is, even if you're not someone who pins, you may need to pin mark, just put a pin in, this is the side I'll be sewing on. So I'll demonstrate that. Here, of course, is the puzzle we have to put together by this little, and there also is a kind of grid here telling you what colors, whatever. I'm just going to follow this. I'm a visual with the grid. Some people need the chart as well. So I'm just going to pull out, so I know that in my corner, here's where you do need to bring your 3-inch squares of Blue Lagoon and Royal Velvet back into the system, because now we're putting everything together. In your corner, way up there, is a Blue Lagoon 3-inch square. Now we need to find one that is Blue Lagoon with your background fabric and put it right next to it. Then we need a yellow with background fabric, and we're going to put it there. Then I need a purple haze, which is the light purple with background fabric, and it goes in that direction. Then we need the deepest purple, which is the dark purple with background fabric, and it goes right there. Next is our yellow with background, and it goes this direction. A Blue Lagoon with background goes this direction, and one more Blue Lagoon square right up there. This set of rulers is just big enough to get 1 row across. I'm not going to be able to get all the rows down, but we'll get started here. little bit there and there, that and that, and that. Okay, there is our puzzle. All, well, it's not all put, I mean, it's laid out, but we have to sew it together yet. So we're going to pause here and take a dinner break because our dinner just beeped, and we'll be back for the sewing of this. All right, so now here's the puzzle all laid out over here to my left. It's a big puzzle. Ideally, when you start sewing your pieces together, you want to make as few body movements as possible, and that'll help you keep everything straight and sewing the correct sides of your pieces together. If this was a small block, I'd really literally put it right here beside my sewing machine. Obviously, this is a ginormous block. It's over there. I am going to have to move. As little as possible, though. So I'm going to sew these in rows. I'm going to start at that upper left. I'm going to grab those two pieces, and I'm going to pin. Two reasons. It marks what side I'm sewing, and things slip on me. So I do pin, and I'm just going to grab two pieces at a time, all the way across the top row, and then the next row, and here we go. Let me just grab this square, and I'll bring them over here. So we know that they need to be sewn right here on this seam, this edge right here. And I suppose I could probably do it without pinning, but I'm going to pin anyways, because that's the way I roll. And I'm not going to show you, but we'll speed up the sewing after this first piece. We'll just zoom through the sewing at like quadruple speed. Okay, so put this down here. Here is my bobbin thread. Fish my bobbin thread out. There it is. And the other thing to do is once you get your pieces, the first seam done, and you start taking them off, I will be chain stitching. As you start taking them off your chain, put them back down where they came from. So here we go, sewing squares together in pairs. And we're just going to go through that for many pairs. Alright, this is the last of the blocks sewn into pairs. And I'm not going to bother to press them right now because I'm sewing in rows, so I don't need to press them until I get ready to sew rows together. Okay, so there is that. Now, the next thing we do is we're going to take them off the chain of stitching, lay them back out and make sure they're in the right order, and then we're going to sew the pairs into rows of 4. So let's get started with that. We'll go back to the cutting board cam, and I'm just going to lay them out over there. Alright, so now let's lay these back out. The purposes of laying them back out is basically just to verify that we got everything sewed in, everything that's already sewn is in the right direction, and that we're going to sew the next pieces correctly. So there is my upper left corner. All right, so we have everything in our pairs. Now we're going to sew the pairs together, continuing our rows, and once again, I grab 2 at a time, bring them over, and here we go. I would think that at this point where the squares are already sewn together, it'd be a lot easier to know exactly what you're sewing, but I still pin because, well, that's the way I roll. And my pedal has been pushed around. Okay, here we go. Okay, so because I left the last pair on the machine, just so I wouldn't have to hold tails, pull that off, open it up, it lays this way, and then this one here, this will be the last set of pairs being sewn together into strips of 4. And then, after we get this sewn, we will lay things back out and double check every time, lay it out and just make sure everything's where it's supposed to be. I mean, you could just keep going around in a circle, grab the next, but it's always a good idea just to lay them out and make sure that you haven't made a mistake. The sooner you catch a mistake, the easier it is to fix it. I have this great big long line of stuff that I'm going to pull off the sewing machine one piece at a time, lay it back out, and just to verify that everything is where it belongs. So there's the first piece right up there. And let me find the end. All right, so let's sew up these seams. All right, let's do this last section, and then we're going to press these because now our rows are complete. So it goes this way and just like this. Okay. this time I am going to cut the whole thing off. And here is all 8 rows. Pull the pins out, lay them out, cut them apart. Okay, so I've got all 8 rows here. Just going to lay them out here. I've not even cut them apart yet, but they should be in order. We open them out this way. There we go. Looks like it's coming out pretty nicely. Okay, so now I need to snip them apart here so that I can press them. I'm going to actually kind of lay them a little bit on top of one another. Okay, so there we go. There are my rows. I'm now going to move this. So I'm going to grab the first row, turn it over, and I'm going to start pressing. Now I am going to press these seam allowances in opposite directions to each other. Okay, so I'm pressing these in opposite directions, one from the other. And then when I press the next row, I've got to be careful which direction I press the next row so that the seams nest. Let me press the top side of this as well, make it nice and crisp. And here is part of a big reason why I pin. Not only to keep things from slipping, but look how nicely my points meet. Okay, so let me grab the next row that's going to sew right there. Now when I press this, I'm going to turn both of these over so you can see the back side as I turn them together. So this seam is pressed this way, this seam I want to press this way so that they will nest nicely. And the reason why I do them in alternate directions is so that actually once I get the seam sewn, I can do the little twist and open them a little bit and have less bulk under any one quadrant of the point. I can spread the bulk out around the whole 4-way seam. All right, last one to press. That one goes that way, so this one goes this way. There we go. I just want to match up and make sure that which direction I press these is dependent upon the direction I press the previous row. Because I want my seams to meet nicely. I'm not sure they have to be pressed opposite each other, but I think they do, in order for the adjacent seams to all open properly. So that's why I'm doing it that way. Okay, so there is, oh, let me press the front side of this row, and then we're ready to start sewing our rows together. And I've been very careful to make sure I keep them in order. I will still lay them back out on the big tray just to be sure. Okay. All right, so here they are, all 8 rows. Let's see. I don't think I can lay them on this small mat. I need to pull my big ruler over here to use as a tray and lay them all back out on that. Okay, here they are, all 8 rows laid out. The last thing to do, okay, I guess the last sewing is to sew all 8 rows together and then come back for a final press. So I am going to pick up this whole tray. Now that they're a little less likely to fall off, I'm going to put this whole tray up here beside my sewing machine, put my pressing mat back here. I am going to come back and press after each row, and not, or each sets of rows, something like that. So let's go over to the sewing machine and start sewing. Alright, so here is our 8 rows of blocks. I'm going to sew them together. Grab these first 2, and yes, I am going to pin to make sure that the seams match. And the reason, I know most of you know this, but some of you are newish. The reason that we have them seam allowances crest opposite directions is so that the seams literally just bump up against each other, and you can feel when they're right next to each other. And that's how you know that your points are going to match, is that you can feel your seams right next to each other. And then when you pin, in order to keep your points matching, you pin in the seam allowance on either side of that seam. So there's going to be 2 pins at each seam. You can do this without pinning. You're welcome to do this without pinning. In my experience, when I've tried to do this sort of thing without pinning, I get fabric sliding all over the place. So I pin. Okay. Slide that out. I'm going to turn that way, so that as I sew up here, I'm not going to be pushing at the fabric that's on there. Okay, so now I have 4 pairs of rows sewn together. I'm going to take them off, going to lay them out so that we know what we sew together next. And I think I will go ahead and press these pairs, which I don't necessarily have to do, but I think I will. My little teeny ironing mat will thank me for pressing in smaller amounts whenever I can. Otherwise I have to go over to the big ironing board and drag the camera over there, and yeah. Bring this back over here. Far enough on here to stay on there. Alright, so here is the first 2 rows. The next 2 rows. And then the next 2 rows, and last 2 rows, and everything looks great. Let's go over to the pressing mat, and I will press these sets just to keep the amount I'm pressing small. Okay, let's press these. I'm going to first, my iron may not be hot yet, but I'm going to first set the seam. One spot there that the seam allowance corner folded over, but I don't think that's going to create a huge problem. Okay, now, there, I just pulled that out. Open this up, wrong side out, and here's how I'm going to press this. I'm going to bring this up here. I'm going to bring these seams up here so you can see what I'm doing, sort of. And here's where I turn, let some stitches on the first seam come apart, open this up, and so now when I press these seams, this portion will go this way, this portion will go this way. So here we go. This will reduce bulk at these points. Instead of all of the bulk of the seam being on one side, it's going to spread it out. So I'm going to do that on all of these seams. You should just be like 2 or 3 stitches, just pop out. Don't cut the threads. You want the threads still there and sewn over by the seam we just sewed. Otherwise, if you cut the threads, it could come unraveled. We're just popping the stitches, leaving the threads. Okay, now this is going to lay on here rather nicely. So this seam goes, this portion goes this way. And the next portion goes the other way. And you can do this popping of seams any place you have 4 seams coming together. I have even done it when I've had flying geese coming together point to point. I've even done it there. It's of course easiest when the 2 seams come together at right angles, but I can do it any place you have 4 seams coming together, and that just helps reduce bulk. It's very handy for, like, if it's just 4 squares coming together, it's not such a big deal because it's not so many, but if you have like a pinwheel where you've got literally 8 seams coming together, those last 2 seams, this is how you get it to be lay a little bit flatter. Let's go back over. Oh, those are nice looking points. I think I did a decent job. Most of the time. There's one that kind of missed it a little bit, but not very much. Okay, so there is one pair down. 3 more pairs of rows to go. Okay, we are finally down to our last seam. Let's get this last seam pinned and sewn and pressed so we can say our block is done. Okay. I won't tell you how many hours of footage we're going to edit down and to get a reasonable length video to put up. Most of this is probably going to be looking a lot like a time lapse. Thought maybe this last seam we'd do in real time. We'll see how long it takes me to do one last seam. This is really not a difficult block. As you saw, it's half square triangles done exactly the same way as we did them in April. There's just a lot of them. Okay, let's get this under the machine for one last time. Okay. All we have to do now is press this last seam, and this block is done. So let's go back over to the cutting mat one last time, the pressing mat, and get this seam pressed. Okay, one last press. And then we open it up and we see how well I did at making this. Okay, here is the center pinwheel. That is where 8 seams are coming together. I'm going to pop this open. Okay. All right, just need one final press on the outside. All right, there is this block in its full glory. Get something that holds the corners up a bit better here. And raise the camera up. Tell me when we can see the whole thing. Can you see the whole thing?
Yeah, mostly. That's good. Yeah.
There is this Dutch rose block. Not hard. All half square triangles, but there's a lot of them and it does take a while. But not difficult. Okay, here it is. Here is the Dutch Rose, your May Saturday sampler block. Be thankful you only have to make one of these. It is not difficult. It is all half square triangles, but there's a whole lot of them, so it takes a bit of time. Thanks for watching. Hope you made it all the way through this video. Make sure you look for the June Saturday Sampler, virtual Saturday Sampler, which we'll do as a premiere again. That will be on the 3rd Saturday of June, whatever day that is. Oops, I forgot to look that up. At 11 o'clock, I'll have that one up virtually. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, smash the notification button. If I can get to 100 subscribers on my channel, I can get a little permalink so that it doesn't have all that gobbledygook after YouTube. Can say Charm Needles. So that'd be really awesome if we can do that. So if you can get me to 100 subscribers, that'd be really great. Thanks for watching. We will see you next time.